Is it burnout or is it perimenopause? Because the symptoms are almost identical, and most doctors can't tell the difference either. You're on the transatlantic flight home from a working trip, staring out the window thinking that you really don't want to go back to the office on Monday. The work that used to feel meaningful now feels pointless. It's hard to know if you feel burned out or if this is just perimenopause. Both of them share almost the same symptoms: fatigue that sleep doesn't fix, slipping concentration, getting irritated more easily than usual, mood that's harder to manage. The overlap is big enough that millions of women in their 40s and 50s end up being treated for one thing, when in reality, they need both problems addressed, or a different one altogether. So let's get into the actual science, because there is a way to tell them apart. Women between 40 and 55 struggle with burnout and perimenopause at the same time. That's also the stage of life when work and family demands are at their highest. We are a sandwich generation. We deal with aging parents and raising or financially supporting our kids. And by the way, both are surprisingly underdocumented in medical records. A study published in Mayo Clinic Proceedings found that around 87% of women with significant menopausal symptoms hadn't even sought medical care. The most common reason was that they claimed to be simply too busy. We often neglect ourselves. Picture the situation. A woman comes to her doctor exhausted, struggling to concentrate, feeling low or overwhelmed. If perimenopause symptoms were never documented before, it could easily look like burnout. And most likely, that's how she would end up being treated. The tools we use to measure burnout don't make this any easier. The Maslow Burnout Inventory, which is the most widely used burnout questionnaire in the world, has never actually been validated in women going through perimenopause or menopause. Can you imagine that? One study even found that when the test tries to rule out burnout, it's only about 48% accurate. That's basically a coin flip. The most popular burnout questionnaire is the same as guessing if you are burned out or not. The questionnaire measures things like fatigue, sleep problems, irritability, and trouble concentrating. Does that sound familiar? To me, it sounds like a description of most 40 or 50-year-old women. It has no way to tell whether the symptoms are coming from hormonal changes. So, if you scored high on a burnout scale in your mid-40s, part of that score could simply reflect perimenopause. According to the World Health Organization, burnout isn't classified as a disease. In the International Classification of Disease, ICD-11, it's described as an occupational phenomenon, something that develops specifically in the context of work. Of course, that makes sense. The definition has 3 parts. First, exhaustion. Second, feeling mentally distant from your job, what doctors call cynicism. And third, a drop in professional efficacy. It's that sense you have that your performance has slipped and you can't quite get it back. The WHO is very clear about one thing. Burnout is supposed to apply only to work, not to your whole life. And that's the key to separating perimenopause or menopause symptoms from burnout. Meet Sarah, a 43-year-old senior project manager at a consulting firm. She used to be the person everyone called when a deadline was on fire. These days, she drags herself to her desk by 9, stares at her inbox for 20 minutes before opening a single email, and has quietly stopped volunteering for the high-visibility projects she once chased aggressively. She tells herself it's just a busy season. But the busy season has lasted 8 months. In back-to-back meetings, she catches herself thinking, who cares? A thought that would have horrified her a year ago. But here's the telling detail. Saturday morning, she's okay. At her sister's birthday dinner, she was present. She's laughing with her friends. She's going to her yoga class on Sunday mornings. It's only when Monday comes that she doesn't feel like laughing or even opening her laptop. It is the job that is grinding her down, which is exactly what the WHO definition is pointing at. Before we go further, if you're finding this useful, subscribe to the channel. New video every Tuesday. Every week, one topic, one video, peer-reviewed research that actually explains what is happening to you during perimenopause. Now, let's talk about biology and what we still don't know. The main theory is that the long-term workplace stress affects the body's stress response system, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA. The way the HPA axis works is hypothalamus notices stress, sends a message to the brain pituitary gland, which then tells adrenal glands to release cortisol to help the body deal with the situation and then calm back down afterwards. With long-term workplace stress, the system may shift from on to tired and unresponsive. Let's use a new parent as an example. At the beginning, they wake up to every small sound that a baby makes. The parent system is fully responsive, exactly as it should be at this time. After months of sleepless nights, they start sleeping through noises they would have reacted to before. It's not because they stopped caring. Any parent will tell you that's not the case. But because the system has simply run out of gas. It can't produce the same response anymore. Researchers have tried for years to find a biological marker for burnout, and they haven't succeeded. A review looked at different studies testing 38 different biological markers, including cortisol patterns, and none consistently identified burnout. So right now, there is no blood test for burnout. It's diagnosed based on symptoms and context only. I actually love that the scientists are trying to determine burnout with a blood test. How cool is that? A large review in Work and Stress looked at cognitive performance in people with burnout compared to healthy individuals across multiple studies. What they found was pretty consistent. People that were burned out had slower processing speed. Attention wasn't as sharp. Executive function dropped slightly, and memory also took a hit. One thing really stood out to me: how people feel cognitively and how they actually perform an objective test don't match very well. People with burnout often feel significantly more impaired than what the test results show. So, in a way, burnout is not as biologically driven as perimenopause is. Another interesting thing is the line between burnout and depression is blurry in the research. A large review of 92 studies found that about half of people with severe burnout also met criteria for clinical depression. That doesn't necessarily mean burnout and depression are the same thing, but it does mean that the tools we use to measure them struggle to separate them in many people. Now, let's switch gears and talk about what happens in the brain during perimenopause. Estrogen receptors are spread throughout the brain, including areas involved in memory. That's the hippocampus. Decision-making, that's the prefrontal cortex, and emotion, which is the amygdala. Estrogen also influences several key neurotransmitter systems, including serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. Those are the chemical systems that help regulate mood, motivation, and cognitive function. During perimenopause, estrogen doesn't just slowly decline. For a while, it fluctuates quite unpredictably. The brain is essentially trying to adjust to changing hormone signals. That's a biological process, not simply stress. Many compare estrogen to a roller coaster, but I'd like to think of it as turbulence during the flight, which you can't get off. Sometimes smooth for hours, then suddenly you're grabbing the armrest or your neighbor's hand. The pilot doesn't always warn you when the next turbulence is coming. Your body is responding to a signal that genuinely keeps changing. According to a major review published in Menopause, hot flashes affect about 80% of women during perimenopause. Around 60% of women report memory problems. About half report irritability, nervousness, or frequent mood changes. Another analysis followed more than 2,300 women. Researchers noticed something subtle but very interesting. Normally, when people repeat the same cognitive tests over time, their scores improve because they become familiar with the test itself. However, women in perimenopause do not improve as expected. So basically, the brain is working harder just to keep up. Let's see. Fatigue, memory problems, trouble concentrating, irritability, mood changes, poor sleep, all of those show up in both burnout and perimenopause. They're documented in both research areas, and on a simple symptom checklist, they look almost identical. No wonder it's hard to tell them apart. Remember, the Maslow Burnout Inventory is the most common burnout questionnaire. But even this questionnaire only correctly identifies about 50% who have burnout. And if a questionnaire can't reliably rule burnout out, it definitely can't tell the difference between fatigue coming from work stress and fatigue coming from hormonal changes. I'm wondering, have you done this questionnaire or similar at your work? Tell me about it in the comments. Unfortunately, there is no peer-reviewed study that has directly compared burnout and perimenopause symptoms in the same group of women. The overlap is well supported in the literature, but it hasn't been tested head-to-head in a single study. But the research gives us certain patterns that help to separate burnout from perimenopause. Not perfect, but it can help. The first thing to look at is context. Burnout is defined as something tied to work. Obviously, if Sunday evening feels heavy because Monday is coming, and you suddenly feel better after 2 weeks away from work, that pattern tells you something. Perimenopause doesn't behave like that. The fatigue, the brain fog, and the mood swings don't disappear on vacation. They show up on weekends, at home, even on a quiet Saturday morning when you're having your favorite cup of coffee and scrolling through Instagram. When symptoms ignore context, that's often a hint that biology is involved. The second signal is the feeling you have towards the work itself. Burnout isn't just exhaustion. It usually comes with a kind of emotional distance from the job. You become more cynical. You simply go through the motions. Tasks that used to matter feel completely pointless. You struggle to care. Burnout often changes how you feel about the job itself. Not your hobbies, or your kids, or your friends, or your partner. It's not something that perimenopause research describes as a direct hormonal symptom. There is a real difference between, I want to do my job well, but my brain feels slower, and I don't care about this job anymore. Those are two different situations. The third clue is physical symptoms. Hot flashes, night sweats, sudden heat intolerance, even occasional heart racing. Those don't belong to burnout. They show up again and again in menopause research. A lot of women brush off mild heat waves or occasional night sweats as stress. But even subtle symptoms can be a useful signal that hormones are part of the picture. The fourth clue is the timeline. Burnout usually has a story behind it. Maybe a promotion doubled your workload. Maybe a company restructure wiped out your team. Maybe you've been pushing through months or years of constant pressure without any recovery. When you look back, there's usually a clearer sequence of events. Perimenopause follows a different clock. It's tied to reproductive biology, not your job history. It typically starts sometime in the 40s and can last up to 12 years. Perimenopause and burnout can feed into each other. Menopausal symptoms can make burnout more likely. There was a study in 2024 that looked at working menopausal women in Belgium. About 41% of those women reported they felt a strong need to recover, which is a warning sign that someone is heading towards burnout. The strongest predictor was poor work-life balance. Another large study in the Netherlands looked at more than 4,000 working women. It found that women with menopausal symptoms were more likely to feel emotionally exhausted. Women in perimenopause also said their work felt harder to keep up compared with women who hadn't reached that stage yet. When you think about it, the mechanism isn't mysterious. The same job becomes harder when you're sleeping badly, dealing with hot flashes during meetings, and your brain is working through hormonal changes. The workload hasn't changed, but the energy available to handle it has. It's like your usual morning run, but imagine you had only 2 hours of sleep, it's raining, it's cold, and you didn't have breakfast. The run is the same distance, same scenery, but you have to work harder to cover the same ground. On the other hand, long-term stress can make menopausal symptoms last longer. One study followed more than 1,400 women in perimenopause. Women who were already under a lot of stress when their hot flashes first started tended to deal with those symptoms for longer. The same pattern showed up with anxiety and depression. When those were higher at the beginning, the menopausal symptoms were usually stronger and lasted longer. Burnout and perimenopause share almost identical symptoms. Just think about it. Fatigue, brain fog, irritability, poor sleep, that truly makes them difficult to tell apart. Burnout is strictly a work phenomenon, while perimenopause follows a biological clock and doesn't care whether it's a workday or a quiet Saturday. The two can amplify each other. Hormonal changes drain the energy available to handle the same workload, and chronic stress can make menopausal symptoms more intense and longer lasting. The practical takeaway is pretty simple. If someone only addresses burnout but ignores the hormonal side or only treats the menopausal symptoms while chronic stress continues, recovery is much harder. Both sides of the picture usually need attention. If this helped explain what you've been experiencing, like the video. Subscribe because I'm covering a new perimenopause brain topic every single week. And share this with any woman who's been made to feel like her cognitive symptoms aren't real or don't matter. See you next week.